If you're a businessman, there is no way you will produce goods or services, but government will be the one to determine the price at which you sell your goods or services. Because what subsidy does, which is basically the price controlled by government, is that it distorts market. It creates opportunity for arbitrage, and it disincentivizes investment.
So I'd just like to say thank you very much, Dr. Nuhu Habib, for taking out the time to join us today. And incidentally, you and I share the same name.
It's my honor.
So I know
also
that
to
it's
be
going to. I know it's going to be a brilliant conversation because we share the same name. Ironically, they say Habibs are very studious at the things that they do.
So that's what I like to.
So for those watching, my guest today is Dr. Nuhu Habib. Dr. Nuhu Habib is a gigantic figure when it comes to the oil and gas space in Nigeria. Dr. Nuhu Habib was also very instrumental to the implementation of Nigeria's Petroleum Industry Act 2021. As a matter of fact, he was on the presidential committee. Petroleum has been something that has been a major issue in Nigeria, where a lot of people have asked thousands of questions in relation to how an oil-producing country like Nigeria would actually suffer the way it does when it comes to either the exploration of oil, the production, the refinement of oil, sales, distribution, and a myriad of other issues. Nigerians find themselves off and on in the past 40 years having to go and queue for petrol at one point in time in the other. Then you also now have the issue of the fluctuation in prices, and people expecting that because Nigeria produces oil, Nigeria should be refining oil so that Nigerians can get petrol for free. Today, we're going to actually have a conversation with Dr. Nuhu Habib, who's going to enlighten us quite a bit on the issues surrounding this petroleum industry. Dr. Nuhu Habib, thank you for taking out the time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Dr. Nuhu, you're an expert in this matter. Nigerians have tons of questions, but I'll first start with the key highlights of the Petroleum Industry Act 2021. What exactly is the Petroleum Industry Act 2021?
Okay, once again, thank you very much for having me. The Petroleum Industry Act is a landmark legislation that was primarily designed to change the legal, regulatory, and fiscal framework guiding the rules of the game and day-to-day operations of the oil and gas industry. Of course, if you recall, the principal law that guides the operations of the industry is the Petroleum Act, which was enacted in 1969. And obviously, oil and gas industry is a very dynamic industry. As far back as 1999, the OGIC team, which is Oil and Gas Implementation Reform Committee, was given birth to by President Obasanjo with a view to articulate all the challenges dividing the growth in the industry that can enable sustainable development and growth of the sector in terms of investment attraction, in terms of value creation to the economy, in terms of shared prosperity, in terms of environmental sustainability, in terms of host community empowerment, and the rest of them. Certainly from 2000, when the committee was inaugurated, we keep rolling. Several attempts were made to get the legislation through the door of the legal framework and legislative processes in Nigeria. Unfortunately, we never had the privilege of doing that until when in 2020, when that attempt was reversed again, and a select team of competent Nigerians, dominantly from the public sector, were basically run by the government, and started with the task and the responsibility of midwifing the design, the drafting, and the development of the law, which is the most comprehensive legislation that has ever been done as far as the petroleum industry in Nigeria is concerned. So principally speaking, is a law that seeks to look at what are the governance challenges in the industry. And primarily, you may recall that prior to Now, NNPC used to be a quasi regulator, a quasi policy maker, yet a national oil company whose responsibility is supposed to be commercial operations. The ministry also,
Okay.
the Ministry of Petroleum Resources also, which is supposed to be the policy anchor under the guidance and leadership of the Minister of Petroleum Resources. The Minister of Petroleum Resources under Petroleum Act Environment is the chief regulator, is the chief commercial officer, is the chief policy anchor. The regulatory space was scattered around several institutions that does several aspects of regulation of the industry. The Department of Petroleum Resources is the principal technical regulator that regulates businesses across the industry in terms of upstream, midstream, and downstream, but their focus is only technical regulation. The Petroleum Product Pricing Regulatory Agency was responsible for pricing regulation alone, and quite numerous of other government entities that were handling other segments of the regulation of the industry. That's from the governance side. Obviously, from the fiscal environment, which determines what is the taxation frame, what is the royalty regime, what are the commercial enablers that can allow an investor to make a decision to invest in Nigeria or otherwise, have pretty much been quite outdated. And some of them were not even only outdated, but were also injurious on the part of Nigeria and the part of the investor. There was so much lacuna, there was so much misunderstanding, there was so much interpretation challenges that led to legal disputes between our investors and the NNPC. Obviously, we were all aware of the tremendous challenges facing the Nigeria environment in terms of environmental sustainability and environmental protection, and also issues of socio-economic empowerment. Several attempts were made by several past governments through 13% derivation, through amnesty program, through the creation of the Ministry of Niger Delta. None had delivered aspirations of the Niger Delta community. It's a law that seeks to provide a gamut of solutions that seeks to not only incentivize investment inflow into Nigeria, but at the same time create an opportunity where Nigeria can actually begin to contemplate, and not only contemplating, but going for processing the crude oil rather than just exporting the raw crude oil. So it's a legislation that set a mechanism that deliberately enhanced the transportation sector and the processing sector of the oil and gas industry, which is called the midstream business, and also create sufficient legal enablement that can allow the marketing and sales systems segment of the industry to actually thrive, which is the downstream system or sector, while at the same time allowing the golden egg, which is the upstream business, to actually be sufficiently large in terms of expansion, in terms of industry optimization, in terms of indigenous participation, to actually thrive in a manner that it can support supply of input into the midstream and consequently down to the midstream of aspect of Nigeria, while at the same time driving exportation and international market growth for Nigeria.
So, Dr. Habib, you were a member of the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission. That gives you a very deep insight into the petroleum industry. The average Nigerian does not understand any of the technicalities. Like I said earlier on, they had very, very high expectations over the fact that they feel that oil is their commonwealth. And if Nigeria was producing as much oil as it was, people who work in NNPC, living the type of lifestyles that they live, and people who were participating in the oil industry also living very fast off the resources. A lot of them would have actually felt that they could actually even buy petrol, or rather, get petrol at the petrol stations for free, because they felt that we produce enough oil and that makes Nigeria a rich country. Can you please explain to them exactly what it means for you to have oil, produce oil, refine, and then distribute?
Okay, thank you very much. So the process flow in terms of what you just said is simply put describing the upstream sector operations, and that is where once you have been able to acquire prospective license, which confers the right to explore or search and find the oil. And when you find the oil and you prove that you can produce it to a commercial level, then having fulfilled the requirement, you now be granted the mining lease. And the mining lease allows you to produce and export the oil. So this is the upstream business. However, when you produce oil, the oil comes with impurities. So it needs to be processed to remove unwanted gases, to remove water and other unwanted materials. And having passed through that simpler process, what I may simply call treatment, then you need to transport the oil, which typically will be done through a pipeline to where either you are going to export it or to market, or you are going to send it to a refinery that will be able to refine it into various petroleum products that are going to be usable to the end user. So that is how the operations typically work. But underpinning the operations of the industry is the reality that oil and gas industry is a global industry. Goods and services are valued on a global scale because the price of oil, that is why it's traded internationally. So typically, if you recall when Nigerian NNPC refineries were absolutely operational, and that was one of the most revolutionary attempts that Nigeria made. Because Petroleum Act by its design was never a law that fixed promote refining as a business itself. The law was designed as discover, produce, and export on legal enablement. But however, given the desirability of Nigeria to ensure energy sufficiency, our past leaders thought the ingenuity and making sure that there are refineries that come into Nigeria to help us to domesticate value and support our economic growth. And of course, Nigeria kept being a net exporter of refined products up to the best of what I may recall. So that leads us to the replacement of our supply source to simply lean on export markets. And that's why we keep importing, refined petroleum product. But what is the thing that can allow a businessman to invest in refining business? Petroleum Act empowers the Minister of Petroleum Resources to determine the price of refined products in Nigeria. And if you are a businessman, there is no way you will produce goods or services, but government will be the one to determine the price at which you sell your goods or services. That became a huge disincentive for anybody to invest in refining business in Nigeria. Now, and this informed the desirability for petroleum industry to come into effect. And it's actually on the prime drivers to remove the power of determining price or fixing price from the shoulders of the Minister of Petroleum Resources and transfer it onto market. So that on the basis of your cost structure, you know how much you invest, and you know there is an acceptable rate of return that will determine your profit that you're supposed to make. And on the basis of that price, somebody that is requesting or is in demand of your product can actually buy. Because what subsidy does, which is basically the price controlled by government, is that it distorts market. It creates opportunity for arbitrage, and it disincentivizes investment. And obviously, with the reality around Petroleum Industry Act today, where prices are going to be determined by market forces, certainly we are going to see the growth of domestic refining capacity on a going forward basis in Nigeria.
So now I picked up something that you just said, and I had a question because it's very curious. Are you saying that ordinarily we should not have a minister for petroleum resources?
No, not at all, not at all. The minister is desirable because the minister is the policy anchor. He provides guidance, he provides policy, he provides direction on where the industry should go in response to what are the aspirations of government for Nigeria. But what I'm trying to say is that one of his responsibilities under Petroleum Act among several others, was the determination of price of petroleum products in Nigeria. He was the only person that has the legal responsibility to say this is how much a liter of PMS or petrol should cost in Nigeria. And that was why government was hitherto had been regulating prices up to the commencement of the Petroleum Industry Act.
So recently there has been a lot of confusion around the price of petrol in the market, the removal of the subsidy, and there was a mild drama just about a week or 2 weeks ago between a buck passing contest between NNPC and Dangote refinery. What is the role of NNPC? NNPC used to be quasi-government, if not government. Now it is NNPC Limited. What role exactly is NNPC playing in respect to how we get fuel at the pumps in our petrol station?
Okay. So this typically goes back to what I mentioned earlier on in terms of what is the role of NNPC Limited as defined by Petroleum Industry Act. Petroleum NNPC Limited, like you also mentioned, is designed to be a company owned by the Federation that is saddled with the responsibility of commercial activities in the oil and gas industry. Across whether the sector that its responsibility is only to explore, discover, and produce oil, or which is the upstream, or the sector that has the responsibility to transport and process the oil, which is the midstream, or the sector that has the responsibility to distribute, market, and sell petroleum product, which is the downstream. So legally, NNPC is empowered to do business across these three value chains like every other major oil company in the world does. And that's really the present day focus, and that's what the NNPC is doing.
Okay, sir. Now, in a lot of countries, essential commodities that are vital to the survival of the citizens of that country are subsidized. In some countries, they go as far as subsidizing milk, eggs, and that kind of stuff, depending on what are the essential commodities in those countries. For Nigeria as a major oil country, because I don't even know how to define it, whether it is a case of we explore or we are a producer. Everybody has been, finding it difficult to actually pin down what exactly Nigeria is in terms of oil. Why was the subsidy removed when it is an essential commodity for a country like Nigeria?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. If you recall what I mentioned previously,
yes, sir.
Subsidy by its design is not a wrong concept. And like you mentioned, almost all jurisdictions administer subsidy in one form or the other. Now, what is wrong with subsidy in our context is subsidizing consumption rather than subsidizing production. And what I mean by this, if government decide to say, as a country, we want to subsidize production and we want to make sure that we are going to use fiscal levers and other incentives to incentivize domestic production of refined products. What does that technically mean is that one of the aspirations of that intendment should be geared towards reducing cost of operation of the refiners. If the cost of operations of the refiners is greatly enhanced through governmental instrument, for example, ease of doing business, the regulatory environment is very predictable. Administration of government policy is stable. The rules of the game are uniformly applies across the board.
Yeah.
There are some incentive elements that can basically allow them to make some gains in terms of what ordinarily should go to government, in terms of government differing its own earnings, whether in terms of taxes and the rest of them. What simply happens is that they are going to reduce the unit cost of producing their products. And by so doing, a price they will sell to consumers also will actually be reduced. So that is subsidizing production. On your subsidizing consumption, the way we had administered our own subsidy, there is no incentive for price reduction. Because remember that oil and gas is an international commodity. The price of oil and gas is not only determined in Nigeria, it's the price of oil and gas worldwide. So what it means is that even if you are producing oil in Nigeria, and if government is desirous of selling oil at a price that subsidizes consumption, what it means is that the cost of refining the product cannot even be met. And if the cost of refining the product cannot be met, what technically means is that a company that is designed to do business, recover costs, pay taxes to government, and declare dividend to shareholders will no longer be in a position to do so. Because one day it will go bankrupt. It will not even be in a position to declare dividend. Because every day you are doing business below the cost of your operations.
So, Dr. Habib, how did they let our refineries die? Because if our refineries were working, it's not as if we didn't have them. We already had them. If our refineries were working, then they would have been subsidizing the production, not the consumption. How and when did these refineries die? How could it have possibly happen?
Well, in my view, I don't think I will want to dwell more into the problem, really, because it's a historical problem. I want to call it's our own issue. It's a Nigerian factor. That is the reality. The bottom line is that the refineries have not been optimally working a greater part of the last 1 decade, or the past 1 decade. So but the most important thing for me is there a down or a new era? Is there an opportunity for these refineries that are owned by NNPC to come on stream again? And the answer is yes. We're all aware of the fact that NNPC have partnered with private sector and raised financing that led to the not only to bring it back, but actually the rehabilitation and upgrade of Port Harcourt refinery. Obviously, for various reasons, technical and the rest of them, the NNPC had been updating Nigeria with respect to the milestone developments in terms of when the refineries is going to be brought on stream. The reality of the matter also with respect to some of handling this project without necessarily trying to make excuse for NNPC Limited is a lot more complex and complicated than really we see it. Because the truth of the matter is that some of the elements that you need to do are not really elements that you just go to store and just procure them. There are long lead items that you need to place order. They have to be manufactured. There is an issue around supply chain management also, which we are all aware of really what has happened in the world since COVID-19 in terms of how global supply chain has been disrupted. And there are all realities that are actually some of the factors that are simply Nigerian based. So I think what is important is the fact that we've received several updates. The refineries work is ongoing to at least bring in Port Harcourt on stream. But Petroleum Industry Act had intensified and create a level playing field where market will determine prices and then investors can actually privately invest in the refining business. And we are seeing today there's a big elephant in the room under the houses of Dangote refinery that is already in operations and had commenced the production of PMS. And obviously, if there is one fundamental gain that Nigeria is going to receive from such a gigantic investment, is actually the fact that it will have significant amount of positive impact in our forex exposure as a country to dramatically reduce that, because we are not really going to be importing the volumes that we were importing hitherto, which had typically stifled our forex market. Secondly, there will naturally be efficiency gains in terms of steady supply over time of petroleum product, but of course that needs to come alongside optimizing or enhancing our distribution capability in country, because we all know that typically the only primary means of transporting petroleum products we have in Nigeria is principally by trucking. And then, of course, we know the associated challenges to do with that in terms of the situation of some of the roads, in terms of the distance it takes a truck to move from the point source or the point of production, basically to some part of the country it takes at least a week, some more than 1 week. So, but certainly, this efficiency gains, as long as we keep making efforts to optimize all the realities around infrastructure to support and enable distribution systems, certainly that will be enough. And I can give you an example. Now, a Nigerian company had long ago tested the possibility of using rail wagons to transport petroleum products. And obviously speaking, my own expectation will be that in the near future, certainly that is something that will be revisited by potential or interested private sector investors, because certainly that will allow you to move significant amount of more volumes at a shorter time and then at a lower cost, which will ultimately reduce the price that an average Nigerian will pay for petroleum products. So for me, the main thing is, it's not about where we are coming from. It's about where we are going. Are there enablers? Are there indicators that should ignite hope, should excite Nigerians? The answer is yes. Why? Because there is a new legal framework that incentivizes private sector investments in the industry. That's the Petroleum Industry Act. And through that, obviously, we are going to see an increase in terms of investment in those sectors. Obviously, some other infrastructure with respect to regulatory environment, with respect to policy aspirations of government, with respect to other administration mechanism, in terms of rules of the game, other fiscal levers, because most of these things are not necessarily only the responsibility of the federal government alone. I will tell you for free, the oil and gas industry in Nigeria is one of the most heavily taxed industry in this country.
Really?
And all manner of levies are being levied by subnationals. So there must be concerted effort.
Who are the people taxing the oil and gas industry if it's not the government?
No, what I'm trying to say is that it is not only federal government that is imposing fiscal burden on the industry. State governments are doing in terms of levies. In some instances, even local governments. So we must have a whole government approach where we begin to look at it and recognize that if everybody keep taxing the industry, if everybody keep burdening the industry, if everybody keep levying monies onto the industry, what we are simply doing is that we are increasing the cost of doing business. If we are increasing the cost of doing business, what technically it means is that we are reducing the profitability of these companies. If we reduce the profitability of these companies, their capacity to pay the ultimate tax that goes to Federation, which is administered by Federal Revenue Service, will actually be very low. And secondly, because of global competition in terms of attracting financing, it is the desirability of financiers today that when you are doing operations in oil and gas industry like every other business, they don't want a situation where you are incurring too much cost. Yeah, because that means you have an implication in terms of how long it's going to take you to pay back the money you are borrowing. So we need to recognize that it's not only a federal government alone, it's a whole government approach. That government must realize, local government must recognize that overburdening oil and gas industry, honestly, is injurious to us as a people, and both in the short and long-term basis.
Yeah, Doctor, what you have just said now, for most people, like I myself, I've never heard this aspect of it before in terms of the local government and the state government's participation in terms of levies and all sorts. I do know that you do have quite a few local governments who go way and beyond what they ordinarily should be doing, where they have different types of task forces, scattered everywhere, collecting different types of levies. But I never thought in my wildest dreams that they would actually be doing that with really big business, like in the oil and gas sector. Now, that being said, there was an issue, like I said, a small imbroglio. There's a trifecta of players right now: the Petroleum Ministry, the NNPC Limited, and then Dangote. The price of PMS very recently, Dangote said they were not the ones fixing the price of their PMS. That it was NNPC. But NNPC was also pointing the finger back at Dangote. who is fixing the price of PMS if the Petroleum Industry Act is already in effect?
Thank you. Well, the truth of the matter, from a legal perspective, there is nothing called fixing price anymore in Nigeria. Nobody has the legal framework. Nobody has the legal backing to fix price of petroleum product in Nigeria. Even the regulator of the midstream and downstream sector of the industry, which is the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, the Petroleum Industry Act does not empower it to fix price. What the law empowers it to do is that develop a pricing framework. And what is a pricing framework? Because it's the desire of government to ensure consumer protection. It's the desire of government to ensure there is adequate competition in the industry. The law mandates the regulator to come up with a pricing framework that will guide private sector people, which is in this case both Dangote and NNPC, to determine what is at which price they will sell that they will make reasonable margin. And I will make this clear so that I don't stand the chance of being misunderstood. What the law requires is that we all know price itself of any commodity in the world is a function of how much I invested to produce that commodity.
Sure.
And then how much am I willing to make as a profit?
Sure.
And how much it costs me to produce the commodity, the individual costs that inform that can also be decomposed. And in this case, obviously, thank you. So what it means, the pricing framework that the regulator is mandated to make by law is to simply have a pricing framework that says, okay, for every investor to determine the price he or she is willing to sell, these are the parameters that will go into your price. We want to see how much did you buy, for example, in this case, crude. We want to see what are the other charge elements in terms of other logistics that you administer. We want to see what are the other elements in terms of potential levies that you pay and associated costs so that we can have transparency. And on the basis of this, every investor will take that template, which is the pricing framework, and input his own data and transparently notify the regulator, because the regulator has a right to know the actual input into that inform whatever is the price you want to sell. Because the regulator has a responsibility to make sure that consumers are protected. The regulator has a responsibility to make sure that there is nobody that his business practices constitute antitrust in the market that could hinder or be divide competition. So this is the reality around it. So there is really nobody that has any responsibility to fix any price. The reality is because it's a very sensitive issue, and there is a lot of reality around it with respect to our emotions as Nigerians, which we are right because we are used to a particular way of doing these particular processes. And there is a new mechanism that is in place, which is very, very new, which requires a lot of time to understand the law itself, to basically deeply implement the law as it was intended, and then for everybody to begin to see the value, to begin to see the impact that this new reality is presented on it.
Dr. Habib, two things before we go. The first is just a simple question, yes or no. Dangote Refinery and NNPC, are they competitors?
Absolutely. Yeah. NNPC is legally a commercial entity that runs business. If you recall, NNPC itself is an equity holder in Dangote's business. So NNPC, of course, is there.
So a lot of people are not clear on that, on they being competitors when it comes to the market. Also, a lot of people are not clear on whether Dangote actually sells PMS to NNPC and NNPC resell, or it is a case of Dangote actually gives petroleum products to NNPC as part of NNPC's equity in the Dangote.
Well, I think I think with respect, there is a very huge misconception here. And I want to urge us to base, from a Nigerian point of view, to try as much as possible to detach our minds from what we think to what it is the reality.
Face the facts.
The reality
itself.
with respect to the, thank you very much, the facts. The fact we know was that the President and Commander-in-Chief of Federal Republic of Nigeria, through the instrumentality of Federal Executive Council, had approved and directed that NNP, which is a federation company that does commercial business in oil and gas industry, should sell through to Dangote in Naira. And I want to make it very clear, it is actually not a new thing with respect to this new regime.
Yeah.
The Petroleum Industry Act made a prescription of what is called domestic crude supply obligation. And what the law prescribes is that every refiner in Nigeria, once his refinery gets to operations level of operability, there will be allocated crude supply to allow or to enable him as the investor that he's ready to commence production to continue to produce. But because the law does not want to punish crude oil producers, the law made a further prescription as saying, but the price at which this crude will be sold must be in line with the prevailing international price of crude oil. And the buyer, which is the refiner, and the seller, which is the producer this time around, are at liberty to negotiate on arm's length basis with respect to what is the currency of transaction. Is it Naira or dollar? Because that has different implications. What it means is that if under the domestic crude supply obligation, the upstream regulator prescribe volume of crude to be supplied to a refiner, and the refiner and the upstream producer agreed that the currency of that transaction is Naira, the implication is that the producer will pay the equivalent royalty applicable to him on the basis of that quantity in Naira. If it is in dollars, then the royalty will be paid in dollars. So the law made this very, very clear, actually. Now, going back to what you are questioning. Now, these are the facts that we know. Because Mr. President directed NNPC to sell crude in Naira, and NNPC now went back and agreed on modalities of the transaction. Remember what I mentioned here now. The law says if I sell to you in Naira, I have the consequential implication of paying my royalty in. Okay. And here, NNPC went further. They say, okay, if I give you this crude in Naira, I want you to give me the equivalent value in terms of petroleum products so that I can sell in Nigeria, because I have a responsibility by law to ensure self-sufficiency and energy security in Nigeria. This is the basic information, the facts available in the public domain. And we've seen that Mr. President went further to appoint the Minister of Finance to chair the processes and modalities that will lead to the administration of this particular transaction. And I'm sure Nigerians have seen them when they took a tower of Dangote refinery. Even the minister spoke to Nigerians. So honestly, in my view, this has no relationship whatsoever with the issue of NNPC's equity in Dangote refinery. That's a different ballgame altogether.
You have answered the crucial questions for people watching this. Because like I said at the very beginning, for a lot of people, they just don't understand. Because over the years, there has been such a high level of confusion when it comes to the petroleum industry for quite a lot of people. Yes, in most countries, the average man does not understand what the oil business is. You have to have a certain level of expertise, exposure to be able to understand the oil and gas sector. But today, you have been able to actually break down a couple of things that Nigerians really need to know when it comes to the petroleum side of things. But because of time, and we do not want to hold you for too long, we are not able to talk about gas today. So that means that we're still going to be looking for Dr. Habib Nuhu sometime very soon to talk about gas as well, because CNG is something that has come into the Nigerian space, and a lot of people are beginning to talk about it. They're beginning to wonder how is it going to benefit them. But this is part one, petroleum. We're going to be talking to Dr. Nuhu again about gas.
Thank you so
In the
much.
next episode that we have the opportunity to grab Dr. Habib Nuhu and sit him down for another hour and be able to talk about that. Well, I'd like to say a very big thank you to him because he has actually taken us behind the scenes, more or less, to break it down in such a way that we all should be able to analyze and understand. And then we know who to point fingers at when there's an issue at this stage. This is the information is out there, is for you. Digest it, analyze it, and then let us stop being sentimental. Let us start thinking of how to collaborate with each other and make sure that we actually do business in Nigeria seamlessly. Thank you so much, Dr. Habib. No, I'm grateful for your time. And like I said, I hope to see you again so that we can talk about gas.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Habib. And it's my pleasure. And please feel free anytime, T. I will be glad to find time and share my thoughts and perspectives with our teaming populace for the betterment of Nigerians and enhancing the understanding and deepening appreciation of the oil and gas industry to the populace. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You have a great day. Thank you, everyone, for taking out the time to join us. If you have not subscribed, it's now time for you to do that so that you can catch up on these types of issues, this type of topics, have the clarification, and be able to actually make informed decisions when it comes to what's going on around you. Thank you all for taking out the time to join us. Bye. I'll see you on the next episode.